So what is this new citizenship test that will become a part of all naturalization applications in the US? When will the new test come into effect? What will it entail? Who will be impacted by it? What are important considerations everyone needs to pay attention to? These are the topics of this video. I'm going to cover the new civics test that was announced by USCIS, and I'm going to go over some important considerations that all of you should be thinking about if you're applying to become a US citizen through the naturalization process. First and foremost, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian Pandev. I'm an attorney who helps foreign nationals navigate the United States. I really appreciate you tuning in. I especially appreciate all of your nice comments, all of you liking the content and subscribing to the channel. It helps me tremendously and it keeps me motivated to continue to record videos on these topics. Now, that being said, let's jump right into today's topic, which is this new civics test. So let's briefly touch on background and what this civics test is and why is this so important. So basically, as part of your naturalization application, so your application to become a US citizen on Form N-400 through the naturalization process, so when you're a permanent resident applying to become a US citizen, as part of that process, there's always an interview, and at that interview, you have to pass a test. There's two components to the test. One part is a civics test, and the other part is an English language test. Now, as part of the civics test, up until now, you have to answer 6 out of 10 questions the officer asks you at your interview correctly. These questions come from a bank that you can find, a bank of questions that you can find online that's published by USCIS of 100 questions, and they're all about civics and US history. And basically, if you study those 100 questions, you get asked 10 at your interview. If you answer 6 correctly, at that point, you pass the civics component of the naturalization interview and the civics test that is so critical, because without it, if you don't pass, you will be scheduled for another interview, but you will not be allowed to naturalize and become a US citizen. So this has been a part of the naturalization process forever, essentially, and that is nothing new, that there is this civics test. Now, what is new is that the test is changing. Instead of it being 100 questions that you have to study, so the total amount, like the bank of questions from which the officer draws being 100, it is increasing to 128 questions, of which about approximately 25% are all new questions, right? So it's more information that you have to study for the actual test. And on top of that, you will no longer be asked 10 questions, of which you got to get 6 right, but instead you will be asked 20 questions, of which you got to get 12 right. So it's more questions, and it's more questions to study, 128 versus 100. It's more questions to answer, 20 versus 10, and it's more questions to get right, 12 instead of 6. So the bottom line with this is you need to be aware of this, and you need to make sure that if you'll be subjected to this new test, that you study the new test and not the old 100-question test that's been in effect for a long time now, I believe since 2008. So the next big question everyone's been asking me, who will be subjected to the new test? When does it come into effect? So the bottom line is this: if you file for naturalization, so if you apply to become a US citizen, if you submit your Form N-400, after October 20th, 2025, you will be subjected to this new test, not the previous 100-question test. So in essence, if you want to avoid this new test, and if you want to make sure that you only have to study for the 10-question test that is in effect today when I'm recording this video, make sure to submit your naturalization application before October 20th, 2025. Otherwise, you will be subject to this test. Another question many of you have been asking me about is this new essay requirement that they had talked about on the news and many of you have heard about. So as background, as part of your naturalization application and the naturalization interview, in addition to the civics test, there's also an English language test. And the way that was administered in recent years is that you're asked to write a sentence and read a sentence in English. And if you can do that, and obviously if you can converse with the officer and throughout the interview, you're deemed to have the requisite English language knowledge to become a U.S. citizen. And the way this generally plays out currently at naturalization interviews is that on a little like tablet screen that the officer has, you write a short sentence and you read a short sentence. For example, we pay taxes on April 15th, or we celebrate Independence Day on July 4th. And generally speaking, it's a fairly short and easy thing to do that often takes less than a minute at the interview. Now, the USCIS director stated that the agency is also looking into amending this and asking applicants to perhaps write longer answers. Some people have called it an essay, but basically write more than just one sentence to prove their English language knowledge. At this point, however, while this was said and this was in the news and the director confirmed that the agency is working on this, there is nothing official about this additional essay requirement, and we don't know if it's going to be a longer paragraph someone has to write, or if it's a longer piece of communication or reading they have to participate in. But as of right now, me recording this video in September of 2025, there is no essay requirement. So if you're worried about that, because you know that the new civics test is coming into effect on October 20th, or cases filed after October 20th, and you're assuming that this new essay requirement that was in the news will also be a part of it, it is not. So as of me recording this video, there is no new essay requirement. The English language test as of right now remains the same as it has always been. So that is not something you have to worry about. My general, comments, tips about all of this, because so many people have reached out to me and they're so worried about, hey, what should I do? Should I be worried about this new civics test, these 128 questions? My general comments are as followed. If for whatever reason you're worried about the new test, you have until October 20th. So as of me recording this video, you have about a month to still file. If you're eligible to naturalize and you don't want to take the tougher civics test, well, file now, right? It's in naturalization applications, N400s are generally some of the easier, forms and applications to file. The evidence, even with these new requirements to prove good moral character, are not as intense and they're not as document heavy as some other immigration applications. So I believe there's still sufficient time to file most naturalization applications. At the same time, if you don't have the time or don't want to make time for this, while the new test will be harder because it's more questions than the current test, it doesn't seem from what I saw, and I've reviewed the new questions, it's very similar to the previous one. And I've tell everyone all the time this, anyone I've ever spoken with, I have never had a client who did not pass their naturalization application civics tests, because I'm very stern with my clients. I always tell them you have to study. And in my opinion, if you're going to study for this test, whether it's 128 questions or 100 questions, if you study for them, I think you'll be able to pass them. Keep in mind, you got to get 12 out of 20 right. So it's not like you have to get all of them right. You can make plenty of mistakes. You can get almost half of them wrong. It's just 40%. So the bottom line is, I think most of you who are diligent and are looking to become U.S. citizens will not have a problem studying for this test. Of course, don't take this video to mean that you should just ignore it and then not even study at all. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if life is a lot right now and you don't want to rush and file a naturalization application in the next month, I don't think that you should do that and forgo other life obligations just because you're worried about this test. I think based on the questions I saw, yes, it's a harder test than the current one, but I definitely don't think it's a test that cannot be passed if you study a bit for it before your naturalization application. The one general final comment I want to make about all of this is that there's an ongoing trend here. The naturalization applications are getting harder. More evidence will be required, more tests, perhaps at some point even an additional writing component, right? So if you're eligible to naturalize, and there's nothing preventing you from doing that, like major life events or anything in your personal life, my advice would be, if you want to become a U.S. citizen, start filing your naturalization application, because the sooner you get it in, the less likely you will be subjected to a lot of these new rules. Now, there's a flip side to all of this that I also want to mention, which is that we saw this previously during the previous Trump administration, where this longer test was actually instituted, but then it was later replaced, and USCIS reverted back to the old test. So the bottom line is, I am not convinced that these tougher requirements will stay in place forever, because they could be challenged and could be reversed at a later date. But if your goal is to make sure and not leave anything up to chance, then my advice is, generally speaking, file as soon as possible so you can avoid all of this. At the same time, based on the current civics test, I don't think this is a deal breaker for most applicants for naturalization. And I think most qualified applicants will be able to study and pass this test. If you have any questions or comments about this, please leave them in the comment section below. Like I said previously, I really appreciate all of you tuning in and watching these videos. It means a ton, and it keeps me motivated to keep recording them. So thank you so much to all of you, and thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.